I was there, kneeling on the cold stone floor, holding that small piece of white marble in my trembling hands, when it simply spoke to me. Not with words, you understand, but something within that statue, something I'd rejected my entire adult life, touched my soul in a way that still sends chills down my spine just remembering it. It was 3 in the morning. I was alone in that empty church, and I swear on everything holy that I felt a presence as real as any of you listening right now. My name is Edward. I'm 52 years old, and for 48 of those years, I mocked anyone who believed in miracles. Let me go back to the beginning of this journey, because you need to understand who I was before that night that changed everything. I was born into a family of shopkeepers. My father sold auto parts in a small store downtown. My mother was a seamstress who worked from home. We were a simple family, but my parents had a faith that, at the time, I found almost naive. Our house was full of religious icons, pictures of the Last Supper, crucifixes in every room. I remember waking up every morning to the sound of my mother saying her rosary in the kitchen while she made coffee. My father always said that everything we had was a blessing from God, even when the bills piled up at the end of the month. As a child, I even participated in family prayers. I went to Mass every Sunday, held my parents' hands during the Lord's Prayer, sang the hymns without question. But something changed when I hit adolescence. Maybe it was the influence of my school friends, or maybe it was my own questioning nature manifesting itself. I started to see contradictions everywhere. If God was so good, why was there so much injustice in the world? If prayers worked, why did my grandmother die of cancer even with the whole family praying for her? Why did entire families lose everything in tragedies while bad people prospered? At 16, I declared to my parents that I no longer believed in any of it. I remember the look of pain on my mother's face, as if I'd ripped her heart out with my own hands. My father was silent for a long time. Then he just said, "One day you'll understand, son. God works in mysterious ways." At the time, those words infuriated me. I thought it was just another one of those canned phrases that religious people use when they don't have rational arguments. I moved to the state capital at 18 to study engineering. I chose this profession because I wanted to deal with facts, with logic, with things that could be calculated and proven. During my college years, my disbelief only strengthened. Surrounded by colleagues who thought like me, we spent hours debating the irrationality of religion, about how science had proven that we didn't need spiritual crutches to explain the world. I became one of those militant atheists, the kind who can't hear someone mention God without letting out a sarcastic comment. I married Marina at 26, a smart and pragmatic woman like me. She wasn't religious either, which made our union even more perfect in my eyes. We built a life based on rationality, planning, control. Our house was modern, minimalist, without any religious symbols. When my parents came to visit, I noticed my mother's sad gaze sweeping across the empty walls, where before, in my childhood home, there had been so many sacred images. The years went by, and I built a solid career as a civil engineer. I worked for a large company, designing bridges and overpasses. I liked the precision of the calculations, the certainty that if I followed the correct formulas, everything would work perfectly. This mentality extended to all aspects of my life. I believed I could control everything through logic and planning. Marina and I decided to have children when I turned 30. It was a rational decision. We were financially stable, our careers were on track, it was the right time. When our first child, Gabriel, was born, I felt immense joy, but also a responsibility to protect him from all the superstitions I had rejected. I wanted to raise him to be a critical thinker, someone who based his decisions on facts, not beliefs. 3 years later came Isabella, our daughter. 2 wonderful, intelligent children whom I was determined to raise with the values of reason and science. Life was smooth sailing. I was 43, a beautiful family, a prosperous career, good health. I felt in total control of my existence. I thought I had discovered the perfect formula for happiness. Hard work, honest relationships, decisions based on logic. I inwardly mocked those colleagues who told me about promises made to saints, about miracles in their lives, about how faith helped them through difficult times. Everything started to change on an ordinary Tuesday in March. I was at the office reviewing the structural calculations of a bridge we were designing when my phone rang. It was Marina, and from her voice I immediately knew something was wrong. "Edward, you need to come home now. Isabella." Her voice broke. "She collapsed at school and they called an ambulance. I've never driven so fast in my life." At the hospital, I found Marina in the hallway crying. The doctors were still examining our 7-year-old daughter. When we finally managed to speak to the pediatrician, his words fell on us like a hammer. "We need to run more tests, but there are worrying signs. It could be neurological." The following days blurred into a whirlwind of medical consultations, tests, more tests, and specialist opinions. Isabella grew weaker, suffering episodes that left us desperate. The doctors used technical terms I understood perfectly. My scientific background allowed me to grasp every medical term, but which, at the same time, made absolutely no sense. How could my perfect, healthy daughter be going through this? It was during one of those endless nights at the hospital that something strange happened. I was sitting in the uncomfortable chair beside Isabella's bed. Marina had gone to get coffee, and the hospital was unusually quiet. It was almost midnight. My daughter slept, connected to various machines monitoring her vital signs. The constant beeping of the monitors was the only thing breaking the silence. Suddenly, an elderly woman entered the room. She was small, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, dressed in plain dark clothing. I assumed she was a cleaning lady, though it was odd for someone to be cleaning at that hour. She approached Isabella's bed and, without a word, placed a small white marble statue on the bedside table. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I think you've got the wrong room," I said softly so as not to wake Isabella. She looked at me with eyes that seemed to know all the secrets of the world. "I haven't, my son. This image will stay here until your little girl is well." And she left the room as silently as she had entered. I stared at the statuette. It was a female figure, wearing a blue robe and with outstretched hands. I recognized it immediately. It was an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. My first reaction was irritation. How could someone just walk into my daughter's room and leave a religious object without permission? I reached for the statue to throw it away, but when my hand touched the cold marble, something stopped me. I can't explain exactly what it was. Perhaps it was the emotional state I was in, the despair, the fear of losing my daughter. But when I held that small image, I felt a strange sensation of peace? No, it wasn't quite peace. It was as if someone was telling me that everything would be all right. I shook my head, trying to dismiss those thoughts. "I'm too tired," I murmured to myself. "My mind is playing tricks on me." I put the statue back on the table and returned to my chair. But my eyes kept being drawn to it. There was something about the expression on that sculpted face, a serenity that contrasted completely with the chaos I felt inside. Marina returned with the coffee and noticed the image immediately. Where did this come from? I explained about the mysterious woman. Marina frowned. How strange. I'll ask the nurses if they know this woman. But when we asked, no one on the night shift knew who she was. There were no records of unauthorized visitors, and no cleaning staff had worked on that floor at that time. "It must have been a mistake," said Marina, ever practical. "Probably a relative of another patient who got the wrong room." But I wasn't so sure. There was something about that woman I couldn't forget. In the following days, while we awaited the results of more tests, the statue remained on the bedside table. Several times I thought about removing it, but I always ended up postponing it. Marina also seemed to have become accustomed to its presence. Sometimes I caught her looking at the image with a thoughtful expression. It was on Thursday night that everything truly changed. Isabella had had a particularly severe episode during the day, and the doctors were worried. Marina had gone home to shower and get a few things, leaving me alone with our daughter. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. 48 years of rational certainties were crumbling in the face of the helplessness of not being able to help my own daughter. It was almost 3 in the morning when I looked at Isabella sleeping and felt a wave of despair engulf me completely. All my degrees, all my professional experience, all my faith in science and logic were useless at that moment. I was just a terrified father who might lose the most important person in his life. That's when my eyes fell on the small statue on the bedside table. Without understanding exactly why, I picked it up. The marble was cold in my hands, but there was something more, a sensation I couldn't name. "If you exist," I murmured, feeling ridiculous for talking to a piece of stone, "if you really exist, please, she's just a child. She hasn't done anything wrong. If you have to take someone, take me, but let her live." Tears began to stream down my face. 48 years of convinced atheism, and there I was, begging something I'd always said I didn't believe in. But at that moment, my intellectual pride didn't matter. Only Isabella mattered. And then it happened. Still holding the statue, I felt as if an invisible hand touched my shoulder. A feeling of warmth, protection, unconditional love enveloped me completely. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't a hallucination caused by fatigue. It was real as anything I had ever experienced. I fell to my knees right there on the cold hospital floor, still holding the image. The tears flowed freely now, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of recognition? Surrender? I don't know how to explain it, but at that moment I knew, with a certainty that went beyond any logic, that my daughter would be all right. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." I remained kneeling for a time that seemed eternal, and yet an instant. When I finally managed to get up, I placed the statue back on the table with a reverent care I never thought I would have. Isabella continued sleeping peacefully, but there was something different in the air, a lightness that wasn't there before. Marina returned the following morning and immediately noticed a change in me. "You're different," she said, studying my face. "Did something happen?" I didn't know how to explain. How could I tell my skeptical wife that I'd had a mystical experience with a religious statue? Instead, I simply said I'd slept well and was feeling better. But the changes became evident throughout the day. Isabella woke up more alert than she had been in weeks. Her appetite returned. She smiled for the first time in days. The doctors were astonished by the sudden improvement in her blood tests. "It's inexplainable," said the lead neurologist. "Yesterday, the indicators were worrisome. Today, everything seems to be normalizing. We'll keep monitoring, but if you're watching this and haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so now." Stories like this, which show how life can surprise us in unimaginable ways, need to be shared. Each testimony can touch the heart of someone going through similar difficulties. The following days were like watching a miracle in slow motion. Isabella improved each day. Her tests returned to normal, her energy returned. Within a week, she was playing again, laughing, being the cheerful child she'd always been. The doctors couldn't fully explain what had happened. They talked about spontaneous remission, about how the human body sometimes surprises, but I saw the confusion in their eyes. I knew what had happened. Or at least I knew that something beyond medicine had acted in my daughter's healing.
but how to integrate this experience with everything I had believed for almost 5 decades. I began to question everything, not in the destructive way I had in my teens, but in a deeper and more humble way. Perhaps my worldview was too limited. Perhaps there were realities that science couldn't yet measure or explain. Perhaps my intellectual arrogance had blinded me to dimensions of existence that were as real as the mathematical formulas I used at work. When Isabella was discharged from the hospital, I did something that surprised everyone. I asked to take the statue with us. Marina looked at me with an expression of astonishment, but said nothing. The nurses were confused. Nobody really knew where the image had come from or who had permission to remove it.
I think it belongs to our family now, I said, carefully holding the small marble figure. At home, I placed the statue in a prominent place in our living room. It was the first religious object to enter that house in over 20 years of marriage. Marina watched it for a long time. "You've changed," she said finally. "Since that night at the hospital, you've been different." I tried to explain to her what had happened. It was difficult to put into words such an intimate and transformative experience. Marina listened attentively, without interrupting, without judging. In the end, she simply said, "I don't know if I believe in miracles, Edward, but I believe in you. And if this brought you peace and helped our daughter, then I'm grateful." Marina's acceptance was fundamental to me. I feared that my spiritual transformation might create a barrier between us, but the opposite happened. Our relationship deepened. We began to have conversations about the meaning of life, about mysteries that cannot be fully explained by reason, about the possibility of something greater than ourselves. Gradually, I began to incorporate spiritual practices into my routine, not fanatically or extremely, but as a natural part of my personal growth. I began to pray again, something I hadn't done since childhood. At first, they were simple prayers, almost whispered, full of hesitation. But over time, they became profound moments of connection and gratitude. My parents noticed the change when we visited them a few weeks later. My mother saw the statue in our living room, and her tears began to flow. "I never stopped praying for you, my son," she said. "I never stopped believing that one day you would come back." My father, always more reserved in emotional displays, just hugged me tightly and whispered, "Welcome back, Edward." The change wasn't just spiritual, but also practical. I began to see my engineering work from a new perspective. Each bridge I designed wasn't just a technical solution to a transportation problem. It was a way to connect people, to facilitate encounters, to allow lives to cross. There was an almost sacred dimension to the act of creating structures that would serve communities for decades. My coworkers also noticed the change. Some were surprised, others skeptical. There were those who joked about my conversion, but most respected my journey. I discovered that many of them had their own spiritual experiences that they rarely shared in the professional environment. Isabella fully recovered. Today, 5 years later, she is a 12-year-old girl full of life and energy. Sometimes I catch her looking at the statue in our living room, and I ask if she remembers those difficult days in the hospital. "Yes, Dad," she replies. "I remember you were very sad, but then you became different, calmer." Gabriel, now 15, initially resisted the changes in our family. He had absorbed my skeptical teachings and constantly questioned my new beliefs. But over time, he began to ask his own spiritual questions. I didn't try to impose anything on him. I just answered his doubts with honesty and patience. The small statue remains in our living room, but it has become much more than a religious object. It is a constant reminder that life is far more mysterious and complex than our rational minds can comprehend. It represents humility, openness to the inexplicable, and the courage to acknowledge when we are wrong. The faith I've developed is not blind or dogmatic. It's a faith that coexists with doubts, that asks questions, that accepts mysteries. It's a faith that makes me more human, more compassionate, more connected with others and with myself. Sometimes I get emotional thinking about how my life could have been different if I hadn't had that experience. I would probably still be a professionally successful man, but emotionally limited. I would continue to believe that I could control everything through reason, missing the opportunity to experience the profound peace that comes from trust and surrender. Isabella doesn't remember many details from those days in the hospital. She was very young. But sometimes she says things that surprise me. Last week, she was looking at the statuette and commented, "Daddy, I feel like she protects me." When I asked what she meant, she just smiled and said, "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel it." Maybe children have a natural openness to the transcendent that we adults lose over time. Or maybe Isabella has retained some unconscious memory of those moments when grace manifested in her life so clearly. What I know is that our family was transformed by that experience. We didn't become perfect people. We still have our conflicts, our struggles, our moments of weakness. But we face life's challenges with a different perspective, knowing that there's a dimension of love and protection that goes beyond our rational understanding. Today, at 52, I can say I'm happier and more fulfilled than I ever was during my 48 years as a convinced atheist. Not because faith solved all my problems, but because it gave me tools to deal with them more serenely and hopefully. The small statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe that a mysterious woman left in my daughter's hospital room became the symbol of my transformative journey. It reminds me daily that life is full of beautiful mysteries and that not everything needs to be explained to be experienced and valued. If you've made it this far in my story, it's perhaps because you're also going through a time of questioning, crisis, searching. I want you to know that there's no shame in admitting that our worldview might be incomplete. There's no weakness in recognizing that forces exist beyond our control. On the contrary, this admission can be the first step on a journey of discovery that will bring more meaning and peace to your life. Faith isn't the opposite of reason, it's its complement. Spirituality isn't escapism, it's a deeper dive into reality. A miracle isn't the suspension of natural laws, it's the recognition that those laws are part of a much larger and more beautiful mystery than we ever imagined. My story ends here, but my spiritual journey continues. Each day brings new opportunities for growth, for service, for connection with the divine that manifests itself through the people and situations I encounter. The small white marble statue will remain in our living room, silent but eloquent, reminding me that when stones speak, it's time to stop talking and start listening.